All right. Thank you guys for joining us today. It is 12:02. I am Erica Cole, a community coordinator with Not My Kid. At Not My Kid, we are a nonprofit dedicated to providing the highest quality prevention and behavioral health programs for kids, families, and communities. We are here today with Partnership to End Addiction, a national nonprofit based in New York City. Partnership's mission is to transform how our nation addresses addiction by empowering families, advancing effective care, shaping public policy, and changing culture. We are here with Dr. Linda Richter, who is the Senior Vice President of Prevention Research and Analysis at Partnership to End Addiction, where she conducts research on the nature, scope, predictors, and consequences of all forms of substance use and addiction, especially young people. Corey Hammond is also online and joins the team as the Director of Prevention Services. Partnership's prevention team leverages research to help raise awareness among parents, educators, health professionals, and policymakers about best practices in substance use prevention and addiction care. Today, our topic is going to be a deep dive on marijuana. Thank you, Linda and Corey, for being here, and I will pass it off to you. I will be working behind the scenes, monitoring the chat and making sure that everything runs smoothly. But other than that, you are all set to get started.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Erica. And welcome, everyone. Good afternoon. Thanks so much for joining us. If you haven't been here for one of our parent webinars, welcome. We hope you enjoy it. And if you're a returning parent, we hope that you'll find this topic interesting. Today, we're talking about marijuana. Here's our team again, if you haven't met us before. So nice to see you all. Also wanted to shout out Janelle, who is our new Associate Director on the prevention team at Partnership, and she will be helping us with these presentations going forward. As I'm going through this talk, if you have questions or comments, please feel free to put them in the chat, and we will have time at the end to get to them. And so today we're going to do a deep dive into everything about marijuana. We're going to talk about marijuana or cannabis. What are some of the background concepts about it, the definitions, different ways that people might use it. We'll talk about the prevalence and trends of youth use of marijuana, and we'll talk about why youth marijuana use is concerning. We'll also talk about motivations for using marijuana, why people might be drawn to using it. And then we'll talk about how to keep youth safe and also some frequently asked questions that we get from parents about marijuana. At the end, we'll share some resources. And again, we'll have some time to go through any questions that you might have at the end. And so jumping right into it, marijuana. Um, Marijuana, I'm sure we all know what it is, but it is the shredded flowers and leaves from the cannabis plant. Throughout this, you may hear me use the word marijuana and cannabis kind of synonymously. I might use either one, talking about the same thing here. The main active ingredient in marijuana is THC, which is delta 9 THC. It's one of the most common cannabinoids in the plant. And of the roughly 400 different chemicals that are found naturally in the cannabis plant, delta 9 THC is the one that affects the brain the most. It's the one that causes the high that we hear about with marijuana. But there's a lot of other cannabinoids, these natural chemicals in marijuana that can be synthesized and concentrated to produce marijuana-like products that are also psychoactive, so also can give you that kind of high feeling. And I'll talk about these in some subsequent slides, but you may have heard of some of these, like Delta 8 products or Delta 10 products. You may have also heard of CBD. Again, one of those cannabinoids, it comes from the same plant, but it's not psychoactive, so it doesn't produce this high feeling. Marijuana, as we know, can be smoked, but can also be extracted into oils and waxes for vaping, can be infused into a wide array of edible products, and we'll get into kind of all of these different mediums in which you may see marijuana. And so the first is smoking. This is, the most common way that people use marijuana. It can be smoked and inhaled via a joint, which would be marijuana rolled in paper, a blunt, which would be marijuana rolled into tobacco leaves, a bong, which is, a system of glass pipes, or a bubbler, which is a kind of a mini bong. Those use kind of water at the bottom, or also a hookah pipe, which is most typically used for tobacco, but can also be used for marijuana. Also very popular right now is marijuana vaping. So you can vape marijuana through liquids or cartridges that contain THC. Vaping products tend to have a much higher concentration of THC. Remember, THC is that psychoactive component, the part that gives you that high feeling. And so vaping products, because they're kind of these extracted oils, have a lot higher concentration of THC than just kind of typical marijuana flower that someone might smoke in a joint. So their effects are a lot stronger. And the aerosol produced when the vaping liquid is inhaled contains other chemicals, including flavorings, things that we know can be highly toxic. We'll talk a little bit more about vaping later, but cannabis flower these days, the natural flower contains about 15 to 25% THC, whereas some vape cartridges can contain up to, 90, 95% THC. So it's a much more concentrated product. Similar is something called dabbing, which would be a waxy concentrate of marijuana. It's this hash oil that's then placed on either a glass pipe or a bong and then heated with a blowtorch, which creates an aerosol that is then inhaled. Again, this is also very concentrated compared to just the natural flower, typically much more potent than smoking marijuana. Dabs can have as much as 90% THC concentration compared to, again, 15 to 20% in smoked marijuana flower. There's also edibles and oils. We know that edibles are common among teens. So dried cannabis or oil concentrates can be baked or infused into food, including snacks and candy. Oils can be ingested orally on their own through a dropper. And edibles are not well regulated. Even when purchased through a legal dispensary, the reported THC levels in them are often inaccurate, which is one of the dangers of it. And the effects of marijuana are often stronger when consumed through edibles than when smoked, just through the way that it moves through the body. It also takes a lot longer to feel the effects of ingested marijuana than smoked marijuana. So people tend to use more. It's very difficult to moderate your dosage with edibles, especially if it's a homemade edible. And it can, because it takes so much longer for someone to feel the effects, when marijuana is smoked, someone often feels the effects within a minute or two. When ingested, it can take half an hour or up to 2 hours to feel anything. So what happens is young people will take what they think is the right dose. They wait an hour and they decide that they're not feeling anything, so they need to take more. So then they take more, and it finally starts to kick in, and they're way more intoxicated than they ever intended. And so then we hear a lot of the kind of serious negative effects of getting too high. The paranoia, the really high heart rate, feeling very anxious, hallucinating, a lot of things that we know can be negative side effects of using too much. Very common with edibles. These are less common, but there's also tinctures, sprays, and capsules. So either liquid extracts from the cannabis plant that are then put under the tongue. There's also marijuana pills, which are made by, filling medication capsules with oil, wax, or other extracts, and then you swallow them. There's liquids that are either made with THC, again, the high causing chemical, or CBD, which is not psychoactive. Um, Most of the sprays, capsules, and tinctures, you see a lot of these in the medical marijuana community. A lot of them are intended for medical use, but sometimes taken for non-medical purposes. And then we also wanted to mention synthetic cannabinoids. Things like you may have heard the terms spice or K2. These are dried plant matter, basically leaves that have been sprayed with synthetic or man-made psychoactive substances that are kind of similar to THC, but this is not actually marijuana at all. It's not a different strain of marijuana. It's not a different kind of plant. This is not the cannabis plant. It's different. And so the use of these synthetics can lead to really unpredictable or severe effects, including extreme paranoia, extreme anxiety, vivid hallucinations, rapid heart rate, vomiting. There's also been instances of violent behavior and suicidal ideation due to these types of substances. So we're not going to talk a lot about synthetic cannabinoids because it's not actually marijuana, but it is something to be aware of. A little bit more about these cannabis-derived chemicals, these new products that you might see on the market. Delta 8 is the most common of these. So again, Delta 8 is one of those psychoactive substances that's found naturally in the cannabis plant. There's a ton of these different chemicals that are found in the plant. Again, Delta 9 is the most kind of typical traditional one that we're used to because Delta 9 exists in high quantities in the natural plant. Delta 8 is found in really small amounts in the plant naturally. And so there's these chemical processes that scientists can do to create higher concentrations of Delta 8 products. Delta 10 is another one of these that's being made into products. And so what they do, CBD and other of these cannabinoids are they're converted and they're made into a lot higher concentrations for these new products to produce a high effect similar to our traditional Delta 9 marijuana. The conversion process, it's pretty complicated. It involves solvents and acids and hours of heat, and there are potentially harmful byproducts caused through these processes. Delta 8 has not been evaluated or approved by the FDA for being safe to use in any context. But we know that these products are popping up and are pretty common. As of last year, over 12% of high school seniors reported having used Delta 8 products in the past year. And so because it's so new, we really need some additional research on this. The long-term effects of using these products are not known. Um, it's often marketed in dispensaries or in New York, we have bodegas and smoke shops. It's often marketed as weed light or diet weed. It's intended to be milder and less intense than the standard potency Delta 9 THC products that we see, but we don't know if that's actually true. There's a lot of researchers who will go out and buy these products and then test them. And the concentration and the strain or the blend of cannabinoids that is advertised on the package often doesn't match what's in the product at all. And we've seen reported adverse effects from using Delta 8 products that are pretty similar to high potency THC products of kind of more typical Delta 9, including lethargy, decreased psychomotor activity, slurred speech, that increasing heart rate, low blood pressure, difficulty breathing, sedation, but also paranoia, anxiety, things like that. So new products, but we don't know a lot about how it differs in the body from kind of natural marijuana products, and we don't know what the long-term effects of using these are. So a little bit more about marijuana prevalence and the trends of using marijuana. This is data from last year. You can see the yellow bar is 8th graders, the orange bar is 10th graders, and the purple bar is 12th graders, our high school seniors. So you can see about 34% of high school seniors have ever tried marijuana, but only about 10% of 8th graders have ever tried marijuana. See about a quarter of seniors said that they've used marijuana in the past year. A little over 16% of seniors said that they'd used marijuana in the past month. And then a little over 12% of high school seniors said that they had vaped marijuana in the past month. Um, we know that the majority of people, over 60% of people who reported using marijuana for the very first time in the past year were under 21 years old. So for those who are going to try it for the first time, it's more likely that they're a teenager. Um, and we know that marijuana use is still very common among teenagers. When it comes to how teens perceive the accessibility and the risk of using marijuana, again, the color of our bars here are the same. You can see that about 65% of 12th graders said that marijuana would be fairly or very easy to get. So they think it's pretty accessible. You can see in the next cluster of bars, only about 14% of seniors say that they see great risk in using marijuana once or twice. Um, but about 36% say they see great risk in using marijuana regularly. Um, so the perception of risk is, pretty low for using it once or twice, but it does increase when they are asked about whether there's great risk in using marijuana regularly. But still, less than half of 10th graders and less than half of 12th graders see great risk in using marijuana regularly. It's important for parents and caregivers to know that the marijuana that is on the market today is not the same as the marijuana that's been used in the past. This graph here, I know the numbers are kind of small, but the red line is the THC concentration, so the percentage of THC in marijuana over time from 1995 up till 2021. And you can see that that line is increasing a lot. Um, Back in the mid 90s, it was usual for marijuana to be about 5% THC, where we see now in 2021 up to 15% THC. So the potency has increased steadily over the past 25 years, nearly quadrupling. And this is important because we know that higher concentration of THC is associated with increase of ER visits where marijuana is a factor. It's associated with higher likelihood of developing psychosis and anxiety and these negative mental health outcomes that we know are associated with high potency THC. And so this is really important for us to remember. A lot of past generations don't see a whole lot of harm in using marijuana, but it's a very different product today than it was even just a few decades ago. We also know that it's becoming legal across states in this country. So as of late last year, 24 states, two territories, and DC have regulated marijuana for non-medical adult use, so recreational use. We know that legalizing marijuana may send a message that this drug is safe and acceptable to use, putting young people at risk. We know that as marijuana is becoming legal across states, it's associated with that reduced belief that it's harmful. And we know that kids who don't think it's harmful are more likely to use it. Um, we also know that the growing industrialization of the marijuana field, it's a huge industry, and that industry has an interest in appealing to young people to recruit a loyal customer base. Parallel, very similar to the tobacco industry and the alcohol industry. And so we know that legalization leads to big commercial industries and targeting of young people. Um, it makes sense that the substances that are legal for adults are the ones that are most widely misused by young people. So alcohol, tobacco, and now marijuana. When an addictive substance is legal, it fosters, again, those big commercial industries. It emboldens industries to prioritize profits over health and safety. It increases the perception that these things are safe and healthy to use, normalizing that use among young people. It increases the exposure and the access that they have to it. When smoke shops are on every corner, young people just see it a lot more and have more access to it. And we know that the result has significant health, financial, and social costs. And this is not to say that we are um, blind or ignoring the harms that are caused by incarcerating adults for simple drug possession offenses. We know that that is a massive problem in this country, but we also know that legalizing substances like this um, also leads to uh, significant health and social costs for young people. And so our concern is keeping young people safe. Um, while having a very health-based approach towards keeping people out of prison for small drug offenses. But that's a topic for a different day. Um, so why are we so concerned about youth marijuana use? Why is it something that we're worried about when marijuana has been something that people have been using for thousands of years? The short-term effects of using marijuana, some of these might be very familiar, is the altered perception. So that idea of feeling high, where things look different, sounds are different, perception of time gets warped, things might feel different, increased appetite, you may have heard of the munchies, difficulty with thinking or problem solving, disrupted learning and memory, poor motor coordination, increased heart rate, and the chance for increased anxiety and increased paranoia. Added risks of vaping marijuana. There's this conception that vaping is slightly safer because there's no smoke involved, but we do know that vaping is dangerous on its own. Um, Vaping THC doesn't produce as much of that telltale smell of smoked marijuana. It still does a little bit, but not nearly as much. So it can be more discreet to use, a little bit easier to hide. And we know that the vaping products have higher concentrations of THC compared to smoked marijuana flower. And that's something that we're going to keep coming back to, this idea that the more potent THC is in these products, the higher the risk is and the bigger the health consequences are. There's also the e-cigarette or vaping product use associated lung injury. This was due to contaminants in vaping products. Um, this is not nearly as much of a problem as it used to be back in kind of the early 2020s. They made it illegal to use the flavoring that was causing the lung injuries, which is diacetyl. It's like a butter popcorn kind of flavoring. So they made that illegal, so that came out of vapes that are legal these days, but still, something that we want to be aware of. Um, the thing with marijuana is that it affects people differently. Tobacco, if someone smokes a cigarette, those effects are pretty predictable. We know what people are going to feel like. Marijuana is very kind of personalized in what it does. So it's really hard to predict the reaction that any one individual is going to have. One person might take a hit off of a joint and feel totally fine, and the next person can take a hit off that exact same joint and have a really negative reaction to it. It can produce effects similar to a depressant, a stimulant, or a hallucinogen, depending on the dose of THC, but also just individual differences in people. The effects can certainly be amplified and more dangerous when a person combines marijuana with other substances. So this is part of what makes marijuana kind of difficult to talk about with young people. Two teens could take the same sized hit off of the same bong and have vastly different reactions. One teen might become really calm and relaxed, while the other may feel totally panicked and have their heart racing and feel paranoid. But there's no way to predict how your mind and body is going to react to THC if you haven't used it before. Another thing that we're concerned about with marijuana is something called cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome, CHS. You may have seen there was a long article in the New York Times about this a few months ago. It's kind of a newer phenomenon because of these higher THC products. And this is marijuana-induced uncontrolled vomiting and abdominal pain. This can be very serious. It can occur in phases which can last for weeks at a time. Um, Interestingly, most patients who have CHS report daily cannabis use, and this does require medical attention. Um, and so this is becoming more frequent among uh, frequent marijuana users because of the increased potency of the products on the market these days. It makes sense, some people use marijuana because they think it's going to reduce their nausea. We know that there are medical marijuana products that are designated for reducing nausea. And so it definitely does work in that sense for some people. But for other people, they end up with this debilitating GI syndrome. Um, Another interesting fact about CHS is that a telltale sign of it is that heat will temporarily reduce the nausea and vomiting. So people, if they want to know whether their GI syndromes are CHS involved or not, often if they take a really hot bath, they will feel better, but the second they get out of the bath, they're nauseous again. Um, and it's becoming more common. Researchers estimate about 6 million near daily marijuana users could have symptoms of this GI syndrome. Another important factor that we want to be considerate of is marijuana impaired driving. Marijuana does have an effect on your psychomotor coordination. It is unsafe to drive under the influence of marijuana. Like alcohol, marijuana causes disorientation, impairment of judgment, lane tracking, response time, general motor skills. And we've done a lot of work in the public health space to make people know how dangerous it is to drink and drive. But some teens still are under the impression that it's safer to smoke and drive, and that's not the case. In 2019, more than 10% of drivers aged 16 to 20 reported having driven while under the influence of marijuana. Um, the number of drivers with marijuana in their system now surpasses the number who tested positive for alcohol, which is different than in the past. It used to be, drinking and driving was really the problem, but now more people are smoking and drinking than before. And the perception of how safe it is a big factor here. Um, Teens don't often know just how dangerous it is to be under the influence of marijuana and drive. And so we need to um, do a better job of really stressing the harms of that as well. Um, some of the academic consequences of using marijuana, it doesn't just affect you in the short term. In a moment, I'll get more into the longer term effects, but we do know that using marijuana while you're young has consequences on your learning and your memory and your brain development. Marijuana use during adolescence and young adulthood is associated with increased likelihood of absenteeism, so skipping school, dropout, and not graduating. It's also associated with lower grades, not going to college, and increased likelihood of unemployment as an adult. So far-reaching consequences. The academic outcomes were worse for those who used marijuana more frequently and started at an earlier age. And so some more of these longer term effects, because the short term effects, certainly people are scared about getting too high and having anxiety or paranoia, but there are long term effects of using marijuana. We know that there are significant mental health risks. It increases the risk of schizophrenia in people who might already have a predisposition. Other psychoses, including, increased risk for bipolar mania, things like that. Um, it can lead to low motivation, impaired performance, and apathy. It can also lead to fertility and other reproductive problems. For those who smoke marijuana, it can lead to chronic cough, bronchitis, worsening symptoms of asthma. This includes vaping marijuana. And also, it can increase the risk that someone will have other forms of substance use and addiction down the line. And it's important to know that there's a common misconception that you can't become addicted to marijuana. And we know that this is not true. Those who use it chronically and intensely can develop both physical tolerance and a psychological dependence, where if someone tries to stop using, they have a distinct withdrawal syndrome, which we know is one of the markers of addiction. Things that it can include things like sleep disturbance, nausea, irritability, restlessness, to the point where it's very hard for people to stop, which we know is a marker of addiction. Last year, there's a national survey on drug use and health found that the rate of cannabis use disorder, so marijuana addiction, among young people was over 16%. And so it's caught up to the rate of alcohol use disorder, so alcoholism in this age group. And these withdrawal symptoms can be severe. It can be really hard for people to stop using marijuana. If they're very nauseous, they have pain, their anxiety gets worse, they can't sleep. It's understandable why this can be hard to stop. The psychological harms. So we know that marijuana use can magnify the effects of anxiety and depression, including panic attacks and major shifts in mood. Chronic use of marijuana can lead to the diminished ability to carry out long-term plans, can lead to apathy, decreased attention to appearance and behavior, decreased ability to concentrate, difficulties sustaining attention. Um, Also, this is kind of a newer association that schizophrenia and psychoses are commonly linked to prolonged high potency marijuana use in people who are genetically predisposed to those disorders. So, what that means is for a whole host of reasons, someone might be more predisposed to mental illnesses like schizophrenia or psychosis compared to other people. You know, family history plays a part, but also just your personalized physiology. And you may not know that you have any elevated risk for schizophrenia, for example. And what we know is that um, frequent use of high potency marijuana products in teenage years and early adulthood can maybe flip that switch to kind of trigger schizophrenia in people who are predisposed, when without the marijuana, that switch may have never been flipped, if that makes sense. Um, there's been a lot of research in Europe looking at this association, and there was a study in Denmark, and they estimated that as many as 30% of cases of schizophrenia among men aged 20 to 30 in Denmark could be attributed to cannabis use, marijuana use. So this is really important for people to know. There's another study in Europe that found that people who regularly consumed marijuana with at least 10% THC were 5 times as likely to develop a psychotic disorder as those who had never used marijuana. So the association is very clear. This is something that we want to make sure that parents and caregivers know because it is a significant risk. I almost included there's a video that goes along with this that I think is very striking, but we don't have time for it. So if at the end, Not My Kid shares the one pager about marijuana that I put together with resources and links. It's linked in there so you can watch it. But I went to a conference and listened to a neurologist, a scientist, speak about her son who struggled with anxiety and depression growing up, turned to marijuana to help self-medicate, and then very quickly kind of spiraled with schizophrenia and psychoses, and eventually died of an overdose of opioids. It was very sad, but she's doing a lot of really incredible work in getting awareness out about cannabis-induced psychiatric disorders. And so there's also a documentary put out through the Medical School of Vanderbilt talking more about this topic. Okay, so we want to talk about why young people might be motivated to use substances in general, but specifically marijuana. Why might a young person be attracted to marijuana? There's a lot of misinformation out there. We know that movies, TV shows, music, social media tend to glorify marijuana use and show it being um, fun and something safe to do, and doesn't really talk about the harms involved. About a third of adolescents say that their main source of information about drugs is social media or other teens or the internet, which is concerning. Um, the availability of medical marijuana and efforts to legalize recreational marijuana certainly contribute to the perception that marijuana is harmless. Um, and since the legalization movement began, less young people are considering marijuana to be something risky or harmful. Sleep plays a big part of this. A lot of young people believe that marijuana use will help them sleep. And, in the very short term, it might. For one night when someone can't get to sleep, using marijuana might help them feel sleepy. But research shows that heavy use of marijuana increases the risk of insomnia, excessive daytime sleepiness, sleep deprivation, and poor sleep quality. So over time, it can make your sleep a whole lot worse, unfortunately. Um, I know I've talked about this already, but again, just kind of highlighting the link to mental health problems and stress. Um, it's understandable that a lot of young people think that marijuana can help relieve feelings of depression or anxiety or stress, so they might use it to self-medicate. But we know that mental health and substance use disorders frequently go together, and marijuana can make those mental health problems worse. Heavy long-term use of marijuana, especially those high THC products, is associated with social anxiety disorder and increased risk for schizophrenia, as I mentioned, worsening symptoms of bipolar and suicidal thoughts. Again, we know that mental health disorders and substance use disorders go hand in hand a lot of the time. If a young person is struggling with their mental health, if they have untreated symptoms of anxiety or depression, they might feel like self-medicating with marijuana is a good idea. And so we know that this is very common. And so we want to make sure that kids get the mental health help that they need so they don't feel like they need to self-medicate on their own with substances. So how do we keep youth safe? Um, One of the tenets that we talk about a lot is this idea of delay, delay, delay. This graph here shows the likelihood of marijuana use disorder, so the likelihood that someone will become addicted to marijuana as a function of their age at first use, so the age at which they first tried marijuana. And you can see as first use gets older and older and older, the likelihood that someone's going to become addicted to it really goes down. So adults have a much lower chance of developing a marijuana addiction if they try it for the first time as an adult. Adolescents and young adults who use marijuana are at the highest risk of developing marijuana use disorder. People who start using before age 18 are 4 to 7 times more likely to develop a marijuana addiction than those who begin using in adulthood. So even just delaying first use by a few years can have a massive impact on someone's risk for having a serious problem with it in the future. If you have heard us present on raising resilient kids or any of or a lot of other topics, you know that we show these as partnerships 10 protective parenting strategies. These are strategies that can help build resilience in young people. We know that when young people are resilient in the faces of life's challenges, they're less likely to resort to substances to try to cope with what's going on. And so a lot of these can be helpful when talking about marijuana or trying to have conversations with young people. You know, we want to know the facts and be a credible source. We want to encourage healthy risk taking and emotional expression. We want to share our expectations around marijuana use. We want to know if kids are experimenting or considering trying substances like this. We want to know their risk level and respond accordingly. We want to monitor behavior and use positive reinforcement. You know, a lot of these are very relevant to what we're talking about. And a more detailed guide are available for free download on our website if you would like to read more about these. So now we have some frequently asked questions that we get from parents about marijuana. I'll share what they are, and I'll share kind of what our view is on how you might answer these questions. And so, how do I know if my teen is using marijuana? Um, there's a lot of signs that might be kind of a red flag that your teen might be using, but some things to watch out for: declining schoolwork and grades, abrupt changes in friendships, um, atypical, so kind of out of the ordinary health or sleep issues, deteriorating friendships with family, less openness and honesty, maybe being withdrawn or acting out a little bit. And you know, a lot of these things, teens are going to be teens. They're going to sleep late. Their groups of friends might change. They can be moody. They can have on again, off again trouble in school. You know, there a lot of this is very normal. Um, but the important thing is that if there's a distinct change in their behavior or patterns, we want a little alarm in our head to go off and know that maybe we need to figure out what's going on. Any marked change. You know, at the end of the day, you know your teen best. If something doesn't feel right, if something feels off, something is probably off and worth investigating. So another question. So what do I do if my child is not responsive to having conversations about marijuana vaping? I try to bring it up. They shut down every time. I can't get anywhere. If you find it hard to talk to your teen about these types of things, try asking questions not about them specifically, but about their friends or their classmates. It may be easier for them to open up about someone other than themselves. This can kind of lead them to sharing some thoughts that can open up the door for larger conversations. If they don't want to talk, you know, remind them that you're there for them when they have things on their mind and they can come to you. You know, you can use kind of organic moments like seeing someone smoking in a TV show or walking past a new vape shop in town as a way to bring up that topic in conversation. If you're talking about it often, not just once you've suspected that your kid might be using substances, it might feel kind of more comfortable for everyone. So have the conversation often and informally. Um, but at the end of the day, if it's still not working, maybe you suggest that they seek out someone else that they can talk to, another family member, another trusted adult. Another question, so what do I do if my teen admits to using marijuana occasionally? You know, a lot of parents may want their teens to be completely abstinent. That's very understandable. You know, it's important to point out the positives, that this is not something that is a daily habit. They're not using all the time. We don't want teens to feel like they're a bad person for trying something or that they're a disappointment. So a potential response could be, you know, I'm happy to hear that this is not something that you do on a regular basis. Um, but the fact is, using any substance is risky or harmful at your age because your brain is still developing, and using things like that can interfere with the things that you care about, things like school and sports, and then kind of keep having the conversation from there. Another FAQ is, how do I respond if my child is resistant to conversations about marijuana? What if they say, but it's legal in some states. Why would they make something legal that could hurt me? There's a lot of ways that someone could respond to this question. One response could be, all right, let's look at alcohol. It's legal, but it causes damage, including car crashes, aggression, other dangerous behavior. We know that it's linked to cancer now. Alcohol can cause major physical and mental health problems. Cigarettes are also legal, even though we know that they're highly addictive and they cause cancer and birth defects. And it's the leading cause of preventable death. Just because something is legal and regulated doesn't make it safe or doesn't mean that it's not harmful. We want to remind kids that unfortunately, things become legal not because they're safe, but because people and industries can make a lot of money from them. These big industries want young people to try their products and get addicted and make them a customer for life. So we want to be, very transparent about the fact that being legal doesn't mean that it's safe. And we have a lot of examples of that in history. So briefly, I wanted to go through some resources from Partnership to End Addiction and elsewhere. And then if anyone has any questions, we can answer them at the end. The first is our website at Partnership to End Addiction, drugfree.org, has a new marijuana resource center on our website that has a whole host of information. It has up-to-date articles and information on basically anything you would ever want to know about marijuana, the basics of what things are, prevention, risks of use, how to find treatment, how to talk about Delta 8 and Delta 10. You can use the QR code here to take a picture of it and go to the website if you would like to look at it. But there is a lot of very useful information. So maybe something you just kind of keep in your back pocket and know how to get to if there comes a time when you do have a question. For those that are looking for support, concerned maybe about a loved one's substance use and would like some one-on-one support, we have our helpline, which is staffed by skilled helpline specialists. So you can connect with a helpline specialist over the phone, over email, or over text. You can get answers to your questions, share your concerns, and get an action plan. We also have online support groups that are led by parent coaches for parents and caregivers who are concerned about their children. And we have personalized text messaging programs that you can join and receive kind of automated resources and information on a kind of regular basis. These are all kind of options that come up. If you go to drugfree.org and hit Get Support, you'll see these. We also have self-paced online parenting skill building courses. This is also available in Spanish. If you find that you're consistently having difficulties communicating, a lot of arguing, there's some good skills practice in this lesson. There's 12 different modules. You can kind of jump around on what's most interesting to you, and it's totally free. We also have a substance use risk assessment tool. It's not a diagnostic tool. It's more so kind of how worried should I be? It takes only a few minutes to complete the survey, and then it will come back with tailored advice and tailored resources based on the risk profile that you put in. And finally, we have resources to support LGBTQ plus youth. We know that LGBTQ plus youth are at higher risk for substance use and the negative consequences of substance use. So we want to make sure that we have tailored resources for those kids. And as always, if you have any questions at the end after this and you want to get in touch with myself or Linda or even Janelle, here's some emails. And again, our website is drugfree.org. But thank you so much for joining this afternoon. And I hope that you all have a fabulous rest of your day, but we'll stay on for a little bit if there are any questions.
Thank you, Corey. That was a great presentation. Yeah, if there's no questions that pop up, feel free to hop off, and we hope you guys have a great rest of your Wednesday.